Tonight, it's June 23rd, and I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:30. Due to the virtual format of today's meeting, I'd like to start by providing you all with guidelines you're probably all very familiar with it by this point. Um, we have participants attending by computer who others may be attending by phone. For all meeting attendees who wish to speak, please speak clearly, pause frequently, state your name each time before you start speaking. Mute your microphone when you're not speaking, and if you're having any technical issues or tongue-tying issues, try rejoining the meeting using a different device such as a smartphone or tablet. Use the call-in information in the meeting invite to call into the meeting. So we'll begin with calling attendance. Valerie, could you please call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Milligan,
Here.
Commissioner Lewis,
Here.
Commissioner Monahan,
Here.
Chair Voice,
Here.
Commissioner Bader.
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Everybody's here. So we have a little bit of housekeeping to get to, and we have a few sets of minutes to approve. So we'll begin with the May 26th minutes. Is there anyone who has any corrections or clarifications to those sets of minutes? Hearing none, those minutes are approved. All right, moving on to June 2nd. June 2nd minutes. Any clarifications or concerns of those minutes? Hearing none, those minutes are approved. June 9th. Again, any concerns or clarifications for those group of minutes? Housekeeping is done. So thank you all. Those minutes are also approved. And now we would like to start with our public comments. As you all know, these are an important part of our process, which we take into consideration. And so members of the public who are joining us, welcome. If there is anyone in the meeting who would like to make public comments, please raise your hand. And to do this, if you are on the phone, please press *3. And if you have joined by a computer or smartphone, look for the hand icon. This could vary. It might be in your participant panel under the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner, and it could also be under your reactions menu. Again, these are general public comments for the good of the order. So if we have anyone that would like to speak, please unmute your microphone when you're called, state your name, speak clearly and pause frequently. Please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less, and then mute your microphone when you are done. If you do not respond after your name or phone number is called, or if your connection is lost unexpectedly, the meeting will need to proceed. You are encouraged to rejoin the meeting if you are able. Valerie, do we have anyone who has signed up for public comment this evening?
No, there's no one who would like to speak.
Okay. So the next item on the agenda for this evening is the continuation of the public hearing for Title 18, the building and design updates. So this is fight night. This is our deliberation night. So this is for the planning policy to deliberate basically what we heard with our joint meeting with the Development Commission 2 weeks ago. So I'm hoping that all of our clarifying questions have already been asked, and staff is going to present us basically with the same information that we already have. We can take into consideration some of the emails that we've received since then. But tonight's really for an opportunity for us to go back and forth about our views, our respective views, on the portions and presentations we are going to hear tonight. And we're going to do this in 3 different blocks. So we're going to begin with Valerie, who's going to start us off with building design. And then once her presentation's over, we can deliberate about that portion. We'll move on to site and urban design, and then we'll finish up with neighborhood overlays. So Valerie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Sorry. All right. Chair, can you see my screen?
I can, and you are in presenter form, so you're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. My name is Valerie Porter. Kristen and I are going to briefly recap the presentation that occurred on June 9th. Which talks about bucket 4. So bucket 4 includes building design, site and urban design, neighborhood overlays. So we're going to start with building design. And so building design regulates what the exterior of a building should look like. In this chapter, it's going to discuss building articulation and modulation, rooftop activities, weather protection, and window transparency. So some of the major changes that occurred in this section, one is the building step back requirement. So we revised this requirement to allow the step back to occur at the third floor. We also tried to limit deviations. So in this chapter, the only deviation from standards is the window transparency. We also tried to reorganize and reformat the code. So some of the requirements have been incorporated into other sections. We also tried to revise text to be more prescriptive. So we took should and replaced it with must. And then we also tried to revise text to provide some clarity. The Skybridge regulations have been relocated and are now going to be in the city street standards. And in our last meeting, I addressed a discrepancy where in the memo it talked about a sustainability chapter. At this time, staff is not making any or adding any regulations, but regulations will likely occur after the new energy code is adopted in July 2023. So there was a lot of discussion about building step back at our last meeting, and I just thought a visual would be helpful. So on the left side is the existing code, which is if a building is 6 floors or higher, then the building must have a step back at the 4th floor. We revised this just because it kind of hindered development. It made construction very challenging. So what we're proposing, which is on the right-hand side, is for buildings that are 6 floors or taller to have a step back that begins at the 3rd floor, but it can occur at the 6th floor if it's say 10 feet. So this allows a little bit more flexibility with the design. So, oh, before I go on, Chair, would you like to deliberate or would you like me to go on?
Please, I think we'll do the deliberations for, I believe that's what, building design.
Yes. Would you like me to stop sharing?
Please. Thank you, Valerie.
I'll get there.
So the floor is open to obviously all of the building design portion of our draft memo. But as you can see, we just briefly hit some of the highlights, the big changes. So Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Joy Lewis. As you did mention that you prefer to not have any questions, and instead I'm going to phrase some of this more as comments, but I want to welcome staff to jump in and correct me or provide more information since I missed our wonderful joint session. I really appreciated the comments that DC gave and the questions that you guys gave. It was a great meeting to overview. And I recommend anyone do it if they haven't already, and if they weren't present for the meeting. So I'm going to say some of my bigger stuff for later and start with a couple little things and say to staff that I really appreciated in this section comments, language that say at least 2 of the following. We've kind of been having this debate of the shoulds and the cans and the musts, and I think that this language is really clear. I would like to see a little more pictorial form. I think that this particular section would benefit from a few more pictures and for the examples that we give. I think it helps a lot of clarity. And I'm kind of curious too about, we have a couple of things for rooftops where we talk about screening. I have some concerns about right now how we have our language, for instance, for 18.606060 rooftops, point J, we talk about how equipment can be screened by plants and at maturity, the screening must at least be the height of the equipment. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the fact that at maturity can take quite some time. And I think that there needs to be language here about how long we want that to be, right? Putting in a plant that can eventually hide versus buxing up for a larger, more mature growth that's farther along on that. I think that language could get cleaned up a little bit right there. I'm a little wary too of point I, the cell phone towers. I'm curious if that language was just ported over, but seeing as this commission and others have done a great deal of work about regulating where we can be putting cell phone towers and various equipment, I'm a little worried about this being snuck in right here because this commission in particular has spent a ton of time on this and the public has given us a whole host of comments over the years about this. So I did think that in rooftop, some of that language is a little bit suspect for what I think our intent really is. And while I definitely appreciate that we're going to readdress our energy code next year, I was a little concerned in 18606-080 when we talk about ground level transparency. Tinting for energy efficiency, I think, is something that would easily be able to put in here while we're waiting in the next year. I'm sure that's going to be addressed, but having this an allowance or having a deviation, I certainly understand the point of wanting to be able to have these spaces be more interactive for pedestrian and retail uses. But I think it's also a very simple thing to be able to allow for a window tinting to be possible. And maybe maybe that is just right now the language doesn't seem super clear on it. And what I'd really like for us to have a discussion about tonight is is about, again, something that I'm a little confused about, which is these step backs and setbacks. I'm going to use the word recessed stories because I think that makes it a little bit clearer. So when we talk about building massing and articulation in 18606.050, I understand that staff is going to reword some of this, but I honestly think this is a subject for policy debate as far as if we align with the idea right now of being able to have it start at the third floor. It's my understanding in a layman's way that more stories equals more stability. So by allowing there to be these recessed setbacks, we're actually allowing something that's sure cheaper for a developer to be able to do, but it's also something that could be a potential hazard if done incorrectly. And so I'm a little unsure because I haven't been right now in the presentations we've been given, we've only heard, well, this is onerous to a developer. I haven't actually heard that the community has asked for this. I haven't heard that this is antithetical to our views of how we want design to be in our community. And I'm kind of curious then how many stories are then going to be set back. We don't really have language that says if we're going to require each floor to then be terraced, right? Because we're trying to gain some sort of outdoor space, right? With each terracing, you're able to then presumably be getting some sort of decking and green space as the building then terraced up. I don't see any language that talks about instead if then they're all going to be at that one same height, which is not terribly visually appealing. Terracing is extremely common on the East Coast, and they generally do it for the top floor. Visually, it looks much better to be able to have nearly like a penthouse view, right? And you have that generally surrounded with green space. But right now, the visual images that we've been given by staff show a frontage, a step back, and then another large wall effectively, which I don't know that is the kind of design that would blend very well in the community right now. So I'm hoping that we're going to actually have a conversation, not necessarily about the wording that's in this first draft, but more about how we think the next draft should evolve to be. Thanks, everybody.
I don't think I heard a question in there at all. So thank you, Joy, for the Jeopardy challenge.
Chair Commissioner Milligan has a comment.
Commissioner Milligan.
Nina Milligan here. I just realized I had written to the host. Thank you, Valerie. And thank you, Commissioner Lewis, for coming back and for providing those comments. The two things that I want to talk about were step backs and window transparency. And the step backs, I'm a little puzzled why the language was changed in the way that it was. I think what was requested from the building industry, and I wish I could remember who exactly wrote to us about how the construction design lent itself to have a step back at the third floor. And I thought that what we would do is allow for a step back at the third floor, but still require it by the fourth floor. Because to not require it until the sixth floor is contrary to design ideas in say when we were working in the Central Issaquah plan of not having these tunnels, building tunnels, but to have a lot of open light in our design, and the step backs are important for that. So I thought all we needed to do to satisfy the public comment was to allow it at the third floor, but not require it there, but require it at least by the fourth. So that's my feedback on that one. Window transparency, to allow deviations because of the occupant has privacy or security needs. This tells me, and I see this in other arenas, that the business or the occupation that's going in on that ground floor, which we wish to activate and engage with the street for safety, for vibrancy, for all the things we're looking for in our city, is not the right use for a street front business. And if they have security and privacy issues, maybe they should be on the fifth floor, the fourth floor, where there aren't windows on the street. To change the objective that we're trying to reach, because the occupant inside has different needs, is, and I don't think appropriate. We would be doing it everywhere then. The idea of having transparent windows is are important in the design in our commercial areas. Light came on. Excuse me. That's distracting. So those are the only two things I have on this section. Thank you, Chair Voice.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. Any other comments as far as building design? I'm in agreement, so I'll take my turn. I'm in agreement with Commissioner Milligan. I think as far as the street floor, I don't think as far as the transparency, that is what we want. We want those floors to be engaging, and I think the commissioner makes a good point. They have other alternatives, but we only have one street thoroughfare. So I don't think that's too burdensome to ask them to possibly think of utilizing different space. So I like that. And as far as there was a comment made as far as, you know, stepping back. I believe the new word we're using is recess setbacks, but I'm far less concerned about construction or hazards. I haven't seen any poorly built buildings in Issaquah. Issaquah has some pretty tough standards, and I also don't know how much this comes into play. We don't have a lot of buildings that are over 6 to 7 stories. We do have a hotel in a few areas, the Costco buildings, but this is not. There's not a lot of it. And again, this is nothing that's being chiseled into stone. So it is something that could always be looked back and reviewed if we start to go towards the way of high rises. So I'm less concerned about that. But I do take Commissioner Lewis's point that as far as terracing, I'll have to do a little bit more research to see what they do on the East Coast. I don't know if penthouses and things like that are going to be an issue for us at the moment. And I actually do like the building modulation. I think the step backs make the building more attractive, whether it happens on the 3rd or 4th floor. Would anyone else like to comment? Anybody? Uh-oh, everyone's pointing down.
Commissioner Bader has a comment.
Commissioner Bader.
Yeah, hi, this is Sarah Bader. And to be honest, you kind of took the words out of my mouth. I wanted to both just kind of say, like, I think it's a good question about the hazards, but I have no idea. And I don't know if going from 4 floors as currently required to 3 floors makes that much of a difference in terms of stability. So just I think it's a good question, but personally have no idea whatsoever. And then was also going to comment on, and that I think the terracing is also interesting to think about. But Chair Voice, you took a lot of the words right out of my mouth, that I don't know how many buildings we would have in Issaquah where that would apply to, but I do think we would want to avoid like 3 floors, step back, and then like 10-floor solid wall, right? That's not something I think we'd want the code to allow for. So it might be worth having a provision in there to, you know, if we are to have taller buildings, to think about terracing. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments? Oh, something that just escaped my mind. It was something Commissioner Lewis said that I completely agreed with. Now I don't get the opportunity to say it. Ugh. Maybe it'll come back, but it'll probably be too late. All right, going once, going twice. Moving on. So we're going to move now to site and urban design. So I believe, Valerie, you're also presenting this topic.
I
Please.
am. I don't know how Kristen does it. She's amazing. All right, Chair, can you see my screen?
Yes, and you are in, yes, looks good.
Okay. Okay, next, site and urban design. So site and urban design regulates the arrangement, appearance, and relationship of a site, as well as the site's relationship to the public realm. In this chapter, we're going to talk about the building orientation to relation, or the building's orientation to critical areas, entryway designs, driveway or parking lot locations, or the retaining walls height or the location. So some of the major changes that occurred in this section, one, the solid waste collection standards, they currently live outside of the code, so we incorporated them into the code so applicants are aware of it. And then this also allows us to ensure enforceability. Again, we tried to limit deviations. So in this chapter, the only deviation that could be applied for is the building location to preserve view corridors. Again, we tried to do some reformatting and some reorganizing. So we tried to merge sections to eliminate any redundancies. And then again, tried to rewrite text to make it more prescriptive. So again, removing the shoulds to must or appropriate. We tried to make it more prescriptive. So we also removed some regulations. For instance, we removed the universal design requirement because it was vague and very hard to implement. And then we also relocated the through block passage regulations to the street standards because we thought that it made a little bit more sense in that location. And also, just to clarify, an email was sent out stating that the non-motorized facility was omitted from this section. After talking, we realized that this section was actually going to be relocated to the street standards, so it has not been omitted. And so next steps will be revisiting some of the standards. So where there is should, that was changed to shall. We're going to confirm that this doesn't hinder development. And we're also going to look at those standards that have language of determined by the director to see if we could possibly revise that so we can eliminate that or establish criteria that the director can use to base their decision off of. And that is it for now.
Great, thank you, Valerie. The floor is open for comments. Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Nina Milligan here. And before I go any further, one thing I wanted to say first, the first thing I'd say, so I'm late, is so appreciated the Development Commission's comments at our last meeting. And looking through the minutes, reminded myself of the hard work that they did and what incredible contribution they make to this process and all the work that they do. So I wanted to thank them, but I also wanted to kind of plus one everything they said. So I'm not going to try to say the things that they did. Boy, their dive is deep and quite thorough, and so I hope that all that their comments are being taken quite seriously and productively. For this section, I wanted to not ask a question. Thank you, Commissioner Lewis, for teaching me how. So I'm just going to say something with giving the grace that if I get this wrong, I hope the staff will chime in and correct me, even though I'm not asking them a question. What I want to talk about was plazas, and I was particularly concerned about plaza requirements and design, especially in Issaquah Highlands, maybe also in Tallis or other urban villages, I'm not sure. But Issaquah Highlands, I know quite well. When we brought over the replacement regulations, we copied in plaza requirements in 1819B, and it included things like 25 square feet per 1,000 square feet of non-residential new development, which was a really important a design element in our urban space. And then for existing plazas in the town center, we had any changes in size required council action. And these are really important to the entire development agreement, master plan, community design. And so I didn't see where that kind of language was carried over into the new code. So I'm concerned about that. Now we have neighborhood overlays, which is coming up next, and Issaquah Highlands is a neighborhood, including its commercial district. But this seems to be appropriate to talk about this in this section, because the neighborhood overlay, as it's been presented to us, seems to be just talking about residential neighborhoods in our neighborhoods. So I'm kind of saying two things there too, that when we remove the replacement regulations that we had previously, we also seem to have lost the connection that our neighborhood overlays include commercial and retail areas. So that's my feedback for this section. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Commissioner Joy Lewis, I think my comments are more what I'd like to push back on from staff from these sections. I think there's a couple places that need to be further dived into for our next draft. The first I'm going to bring up is going to be page 5 of 16 is what I'm looking at from my packet. And it's H, vistas and views. I think that this language needs to be cleaned up. For instance, there's no mention of the lake. I think Lake Sammamish is definitely something we consider to be a view corridor from places around. Also, when we talk about the deviations, I really think there's further explanation that needs to be dived into. This is such an important section right here, and I don't know that it's necessarily being given the due that we want it to be. And I think that this language could really use some more thought. I have worked so hard over the years on design for this city that I'm way too familiar with garages. And I'm sorry to my fellow commissioners who didn't get to have those hours long discussions. But when we talk about family driveways and garages, 18604-090, I'm looking at D garages 5. Garage door colors may be the same as or close to the color of the primary house color. We have talked so much about this, and this language is hugely a big disapproval for me. This is not what the community has voiced to us. This is not what we've talked about for garage doors. And yes, we've spent a lot of time on garage doors. So I think if I recall, in central Issaquah, it's different than, I think they actually get 4 colors instead of 3. So I think they have to pick one of those colors for their garage door, if I recall the conversation. And, we've had other mentions of the color wheel that we use for Old Town, but we do have other design standards. And so I think that this language here on garage doors can be a little bit tighter. And I would encourage kind of going back and looking at that, I want a +1 to 9 as comments about plazas. If we could please have a section in here or have staff tell us where else you're planning on getting it. And I think my only other comment was going to be, there's a reference here to figure XX in point F4. Every building and structure shall be located towards the designated circulation facility as identified in figure XX, but I don't seem to have that figure. So I'm hoping on the next draft we'll be able to have a little more of that. So thank you, staff.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Vice Chair Monahan.
Hello, Matt Monahan here. First, just want to +1 the commendation of the Development Commission. Really great comments in our meeting, and I'd just like to thank them for their expertise. I have a vague issue spotting comment without any answers, and it goes to something, Valerie, I think the last point on the last slide you showed us, which is when we kind of vest discretion in the director. There's a balancing act there, and I don't know, it's probably different depending on which standard we're talking about, which is, on the one hand, I like to be able to just say we're going to trust staff, and so it's just determined by the director, period. There's no other additional standards. And one of the reasons why you do that is maybe the thing we're regulating is a little bit more subjective, such that if we were to give standards, it would almost, trying to put a square peg in a round hole. On the other side, if I'm thinking, if I'm an applicant and I want to be able to have a well-reasoned opinion, or at least a substantive disposition by the director, I'd want to know, did the director consider factors 1, 2, and 3? And, how did he or she weigh those factors in coming up at their result? So again, this is vague in the sense of I don't have any policy prescriptions. I want us to be cognizant of that balance between, okay, this is something that is so subjective that applying objective standards doesn't make sense. But on the other hand, an applicant does get due process of law, and so they should know what was considered, and it wasn't just, that they stole the director's parking lot at Safeway on Sunday is the reason why they're getting denied, but instead it's something substantive and policy related. So I'd want to balance that as a policy perspective, and then I'd also like to just run it by probably the city attorney to ask, okay, how can we be challenged on a decision by the director, and how can we best protect the city in ensuring that we're not, sucked down the rabbit hole of a litigation because an applicant or somebody in the public feels aggrieved because there were no criteria, or the criteria were ignored, or the director only talked about factors 1, 2, and ignored 3. So again, sorry, it's not helpful in the sense of I don't have any policy prescriptions, but I just want us to be aware of when we play in that sense of, okay, we're going to vest discretion in a member of city staff. Let's think carefully and critically about what parameters, if any, we want to put around that decision-making process. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and I think the comments are very helpful. Any more comments on site and urban design? So this is my comment, and when I read it the first time, it struck me wrong, and it still strikes me wrong, is 18604.40, the should to shall. And that entire paragraph in intent strikes me funny, and I personally don't like it. It talks that at a minimum, these things shall be required. Trees, solar and wind patterns taken into design. I don't understand what that means. Are we talking ergodynamics? Are we talking aerodynamics? Are we supposed to be building triangles? I don't know. I don't like the language there. And then we just kind of had this debate about electric vehicle charging. And I went through the numbers today. If I'm being generous, 6.5% of Washington State uses electric vehicles. To require that in 100% of our residential homes doesn't seem right. I understand people want to build for the future, but we are going to be passing those costs on to new homeowners and homeowners in general. And I think everyone can see over the last decade, millennials, Generation Z are having the toughest time buying new homes. Governor Polaris of Colorado just struck that down in his state because he didn't want to pass that burden on. And again, none of these things are chiseled in stone. As we see more parity, as we see more electric vehicles, I think these things can be looked at again. But we're talking about having a huge cost. And again, when people talk about equity and things, this is where I kind of, I can't square it, right? I mean, some of those homes in the Highlands are going from $900,000 4 years ago to $1.4 million now for the same home, the same materials. And that's not just an Issaquah problem. That's definitely a state and a national problem. But again, we just had this debate about electric vehicles, and now we're going to do 6.5% who are currently driving them. Again, using the most generous number I could find to 100% of our housing. I don't see it. I don't like it. I don't like the way it's worded. Again, I understand the intent, but to change that should to shall require. Again, we're building the city we want, and I understand that, but I don't understand because again, that will be passed on to new homeowners. Again, everyone reads about it, everybody hears about it all the time. People who are having the toughest time purchasing homes are first-time home buyers. So again, I just used Issaquah Highlands as an example. Same house 4 years ago, 900,000, 1.4 today. So that is a problem that I have with that particular part of the code. We have a comment from, I believe, Commissioner Bader. Am I getting this right? Commissioner Lewis. Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you,
Commissioner
Chair
Lewis.
Boyce. Commissioner Joy Lewis, I appreciate you reminding us of this because as I was watching your fabulous discussion and comments and questions last time, I was dumbfounded that we didn't have the word capability. We had spent so much time, this commission, I'm incredibly proud of the work that we did to talk about EV ready versus ready to plug and play and go. And we talked about the capability of having 220 in every building, right? Having in that infrastructure is incredibly important for where we want to go in the future. However, it's minimal cost to the developer and the homeowner to be able to have that. And so I really think that that is just a change of wording, an electric vehicle charging capability, right? Or however staff wants to word it, of saying new construction needs to be able to have that 220 line. We need to be able to have the electric capacity put into put in rather than necessarily having the whole setup charging station, right? So I think that that's language that needs to be tweaked a little bit to honor the intent of where we want to go. And I think it's a really problematic area when we talk about saying, well, we don't really want to touch sustainability right now. There's really no way to not do it right now. So I understand the idea that we don't want to put a lot of work into it now to have to redo it next year. But this is a good example of how we're kind of starting to trip up a little bit. And so I would encourage staff to go back. I also want to echo some of the comments that Matt made previously. I really appreciate his comments and attention to this. Minnie, our director, and I have had several conversations about how once we get through the first draft of our buckets, that I'd really like to have a meeting just on talking about how we deal with deviations, how we deal with director approval, when it's appropriate, and how the public can have more visibility into that. It's hard for us to know right now because we need to get through all of our drafts to see when those come into play, but it's incredibly important for the public to be able to have a better understanding because it's been a huge problem with our code of having the public understand when do we have these deviations, when are there allowances, and how and why are they happening, and really bringing light to that process. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Commissioner Milligan. That's a negatory.
I missed if I sent you a message. I don't have any further comments. Thank you very much.
Great. Vice Chair Monahan.
I just had the one.
I'm all screwed up on my chat box. Okay, so I believe that's everybody who wanted to speak. Are there any other takers? And I appreciate Commissioner Lewis's point. Again, I think the wording, and again, we just went through this, so hopefully the wording can be better. I got to be honest, again, it reads like all of these things must be required. I think the ones that, like I said, that caught my eye were the the electrical vehicle, and then again, the solar and wind, it's really not defined what that means as far as building design. I know a lot of architects, again, not really known for senses of humor, but you'll find sometimes that their buildings are kind of interesting. I don't think that's necessarily, I just don't know what they mean by solar and wind design. That scares me a lot. So that would be my 2 cents. All right, moving on to our final presentation. And I believe, Kristen, I think this one you're going to be presenting.
Mhm.
All right, please.
There we go. Whoops. Let me scroll down. Don't mean to make anybody dizzy. Here we go. Yes, I'm going to cover neighborhood overlays. So again, as an overview, neighborhood overlays contain area-specific regulations for specific neighborhoods. So one of those neighborhoods, we currently have standards for Old Town Cultural and Business District and multifamily medium within Old Town and multifamily high east of Sunset Way. So this is the multifamily high, multifamily medium, and cultural and business district in the red. We also have single family, Old Town single family duplex, which is everything that you see here in the gold. We have standards that cover those. Then we have Central Issaquah architectural standards, which cover traditional Issaquah in the purple and the urban core in the yellow in the center. Now we have Issaquah Highlands right here. Now I had a question today. Oh, let me show you this one too. And Talus, we're familiar with those. And I had a question today from one of our commissioners saying, are all the overlays mapped? And I said, well, yes. And if I could show the zoning, and I knew that was on there on some of them. But then I started looking at Issaquah Highlands and I thought, it's the cottage neighborhood or it's the mountain village neighborhood or different things that are there. And I thought, okay, and I told her, I said, it's going to take me longer to map those. And I thought, because I don't know where all these different neighborhoods are. So I have realized with this email that each of those individual neighborhoods covered by these standards need to be mapped out separately and not just the whole Issaquah Highlands and all of Talus. So that will be done. So thank you, Commissioner Milligan, for the question and making me realize that. So major changes that we had, we merged, as I sort of mentioned just now, 5 documents into one. They're organized by neighborhood, and we simply revised and added some text to add clarity and specificity, update things a little bit. Old Town, we had some really antiquated material and color standards for the cultural and business district and multifamily. So we adopted, or we're proposing to adopt, excuse me, a single family duplex architectural standards for single family and duplex material and color standards for CBD and multifamily. And then lastly, in Central Issaquah, we pulled in the density bonus program. We changed the name from density bonus to development bonus. And we also merged where we could standards for traditional Issaquah and the urban core where they were similar. The questions that came, we only had one question really regarding, and this is the one that was discussed by the Development Commission for a while as well, is, I'll boil it down. I have detailed slides if you'd like them, but I'll boil it down. That the standards for this area right here are really covered in the citywide standards. The materials and colors, and then there's one for replacement of windows that would not be included here, which would mean then that colors are open, materials are open to whatever choice. And then it's interesting, the replacement of windows on historic structures, but that doesn't apply to single family. So there really isn't anything in the area that it would apply to because it only applies to the non-residential structures. And then of course, do these meet the goals and outcomes for this update? The Development Commission, if you recall, opted, their preference was to leave this in the Old Town Design Standards. That is all I have.
Thank you. The final presentation of this evening. Looking for comments. Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Voice, Commissioner Joy Lewis. I really appreciate the work that has gone into this. As somebody who has pulled from all the different sections before, this was a heavy lift, and I really appreciate this first draft from staff. And I will quickly summarize that I concur with the Development Commission's answer to your question. As somebody who went through a lot of those comment periods from the public and creating the design standards for Old Town, I am in favor of keeping it in and not taking it out. I hope that helps. I would love to spend my time tonight talking about, I'm on page 51 of 69. It's the table summary of a required public benefit. And it talks about the need for when we exceed the FAR and we allow a developer to go beyond their building capability, how we then deal with that bonus. I, how do I say this? I don't know, maybe I have a lot of questions. Maybe I just need to be better informed. I'm totally willing to admit that. But this whole section, I feel like, needs to go back to council to a work session. I am not understanding the correlation of the benefit to the developer to exceed versus the modest fees and gains that the community is getting. I think that this whole section needs some revision to make sure that it aligns to how the community feels about giving this benefit away, this bonus that would exist. But right now, the example that's been given of, and it doesn't feel to me to balance out the benefit of this 9,000 square foot space that would be given. This calculation to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't know that it really does enough. I then continue to have issues with that the development bonus fee may also be paid to fulfill all or part of the elective portion. It's so easy for developers to say, sure, I'll pay this fee, I'll pay that fee, rather than, I mean, why don't we require all three? If we're going to give them this bonus, let's say, here's the amount we're going to calculate for you to have your fee, here's the open space you're required to give, and the affordable housing, right? Rather than having this pick and choose, and then you can just pay in. We've seen all too commonly that we don't get what we need. We somehow get a minor slush fund, which then makes me, wonder if we're really doing that correctly, because then in the development bonus fee account, we start to talk about how this is going to support the development of affordable housing and open space as set forth in this chapter. I'm on page 53 of 69, 18.703.090. And I worry that this really puts these two goals at odds. And they really shouldn't be competing for the fees, right? So being able to say it's going to be either affordable housing or open space, we're going to have this little slush fund that we've collected and it can be going to this or this. I'm a little concerned then that ends up putting them at odds with each other, which gives me some pause. I then wonder too, for the affordable housing we talk about, this is the next section, A4, that they must use it within 10 years of pavement. It's a huge time period when you think about when you want to initiate a project to when it's being completed. I'm curious why it's so long, and I'm wondering if something can be done about that. And then when we start talking about how these fees are going to be then translated to projects and how it goes to the approval of city council, and if I want to be a doomsday person, I can tell you that this would be a very easy thing to pick and choose how you want to do projects based on how you want to appeal to your constituency. And I worry that maybe this actually needs to go to a neutral party or conservatorship or something like that. I mean, what we're talking about here has huge ramifications as a tool for us to be able to be doing two of the most important things of affordable housing and the creation of open space for the public. And I just, it raises some red flags for me. And again, I completely acknowledge that it could just be that I'm uneducated on this, but it's something that I think needs to be relooked at from this section. So thanks for humoring me.
Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Nina Milligan here, and thank you, Commissioner Lewis. I want to plus one Commissioner Lewis and supplement it just a little bit in that um, I'm not sure, didn't get to study how this relates to the density bonus that we use in the central Issaquah. Is it different from what we developed there? Raising the red flag, the flag on this, as she so aptly calls the slush fund. I mean, what does that help? What we really want are things in the development. And this is the exchange that we're setting up. Whenever we put a fee in lieu, we end up not getting the thing we wanted, which was affordable housing or whatever it was. So unless there's some conflict with the work that was done for Central Issaquah, I'd sure like to get rid of that fee in lieu section on the density bonus. The other thing I wanted to do was amplify the voice. Thank you, Kristen, for pointing out that the Development Commission, and I believe the public as well, who spoke about the multifamily medium in Old Town should remain under Old Town standards. I think we've heard that several times now. It's more of their opinion than mine, but I appreciate saying it again. And then I wanted to ask about overlays just a little bit more. And Kristen Leeson brought up, the solution in the past. So you've already answered that question, but I want to add to it some things that might help in your homework. And that is that when we look at some areas in, say, Issaquah Highlands, this is my point of reference, where we have condominium communities, the cottages and brownstones in the zoning map, they don't have the standards. You don't know that that's where that design standard, the neighborhood overlay design standard, applies. And so if you redeveloped over in the cottages, would you just be, because it's condominium, not lot line, one home per lot, what are the standards guiding redevelopment in places like the brownstones and the cottages? That's where I think is where my concern lies mostly. But it applies community wide, and so glad that you're going to look at where those neighborhood overlays in Issaquah Highlands. So there's this one level, and then there's this more defined level. There's probably some in Tallis too. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up in this context, and I hinted to it a little bit before, and I appreciate if staff tells me that there's another meeting later on where we're going to be talking about this more specifically, but it seems to apply here a little bit too. And it might go into zoning and uses, is that when we take away the distinctions, some of the distinctions that were made in the replacement regulations for Issaquah Highlands, another concern I have is that the commercial retail zone doesn't have a neighborhood overlay on it. It might. And so when Kristen does her work, and how would that apply to what we have in the old regulations like zoning caps and gross floor area, things that designate in the commercial retail area, how much of the entitlement was commercial and how much of it was retail and how much is in the overall plan in the undeveloped lands. I don't see where this might be where that needs to be, because it's like a neighborhood overlay, but maybe it needs to be somewhere else because we want to retain the vision of master plan community and its very strong intent of being a place to live, work, and play. If I haven't said that very clearly, just call me and ask me, but I'm just concerned about the completion of the community. And so we need maybe more detail than others do. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. Planning policy, always looking for more detail. Would anyone else like to comment? I'll keep it brief. I will second the comments by both Commissioner Milligan and Commissioner Lewis. Any other comment as far as tonight's deliberations on either three subject? Commissioner Bader.
Yeah, Sarah Bader. I'll just, I guess, +2 the comments, and like as I read on the development bonus example, like I feel like in no universe would $111,000 make 1,200 square foot of affordable housing. And so it's not, it kind of, I feel like makes the affordable housing option like a non-choice. And so I understand kind of the logic a little bit for like a fee in lieu, but support if it can be removed, the removal of it, because I don't think affordable housing, if that's the intent of this, will ever be the preferred option from a developer.
Thank you, Commissioner Bader. Any other comments? Fantastic discussion. Thank you, commissioners. Hopefully staff, you got what you needed in order to go back and, as was previously said, more homework. All right, so I believe that takes care of regular business for this evening. So moving on to reports. City Council updates. Minnie, Valerie, do we have any updates from the City Council?
Sure, I can provide a quick update. So Council adopted new code enforcement procedures this week. So as we work on the code update, we'll have new code enforcement procedures in place. Um, and so the basic emphasis there was a lot of confusion between what went to the municipal court, what went to the hearing examiner, and there were maximum penalties that we could or couldn't establish. In any case, all of that is cleaned up, and we'll have a clear process of when we get a complaint, how that's processed. We send a courtesy notice to get compliance. Obviously, our purpose is to get compliance rather than just penalize folks. So, and then that'll be followed by notice of violation that then will give the due process to anyone who's part of that, that process to appeal to the hearing examiner. So that has been adopted, and it did touch a little bit a portion in the Title 18. So council had to make a decision to process that separate from this overall Title 18 update, and they were unanimously in agreement with that needed to occur. So that's one update. The other one, we've been going to council after every one bucket finishes the round with the planning policy and the joint board. So the last time we went to them with the zoning and uses section and discussion, one of the asks from the committee is to come back to Planning and Policy Commission on the 250 grid and zero lot line discussion, and put a filter on for how that meets goal related to housing diversity. So we will bring a memo back for your consideration. We're hoping July 14th. Two other things that the committee has asked us is one, creating, when the climate action plan was adopted, there was a lot of things that had Title 18 sort of attached to those as implementation. So we're working on a table. We're calling it an ICAP table in Title 18, where that connection was supposed to be met, and where we're meeting the mark with this Title 18 update, and where we're still a work in progress. So we'll be sharing that table with the council committee at their next July 7th meeting. And we'll bring that back for PPC with some analysis of the sustainability goals. And I agree with you, the paragraph that's in the code now, Chair Voice, that I was puzzled by that myself. I don't think it's more of an intent statement than a regulatory language. So we have some work to do there. But we'll have that discussion when we bring the ICAP table and some policy options for your consideration in the coming meetings. The last thing, the whiteboard list or the future, discussion topics. So we're working on that. We want to be open and transparent at what's on that list. We'll be including that at this point in time where we are in the process. We'll share with the council committee on July 7th. And then, of course, the process that we've always anticipated doing with the Planning and Policy Commission is once we go through all 6 buckets, we will have that list to make sure that we didn't miss anything from your perspective, and anything that else that needs to be added to the list. So we'll have that discussion with you all in the future as well. So that's all in terms of council discussion and reports.
Great. Thank you, Minnie. I know we're all excited to see what's made it onto the whiteboard. Lots of
Oh.
questions about the whiteboard. So
Yeah.
thank you. And as far as the last part of our meeting tonight, any other business or announcements from staff? Minnie, Valerie, Kristen?
I
Anything else?
I have just one quick announcement, which is in-person meetings will start back up in July. So the next meeting, July 14th, will be in person at the council chambers. So that's it.
See you there. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and our recruitment for planning manager is open. We have some interviews coming up for that. But if you have any feedback for us in terms of, your wish list for an ideal candidate, any questions we should ask in the interview, or if any one of you wants to participate in the interview, just send me an email. Appreciate any feedback or any input you want to have in that process.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Minnie. Thank you, Valerie. Commissioners, is there anything like to add before we depart? All right. Well, I want to thank everyone who's watching us tonight for choosing to spend their evening with us. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, staff. I know all of us love being here, but it is a gorgeous day outside. So we will adjourn tonight at 7:31 p.m. and we will see you next time in City Chambers. Night, everybody.